Just to give you a little bio about me, I am a therapist in the community. I have a private practice where I do see clients, but I'm also a school counselor as well. So I have worked here in Arizona, originally from New York though, so I've worked in New York, New Jersey, and Arizona for most of my career, and then came here to Arizona. I've worked in K-8, high school, as well as college counseling centers in New York and in Arizona as well, okay? So just a wide background of mental health issues, and also primarily related to students and to families. To start, a little bit of what our objectives are for tonight. So basically wanting to process communication difficulties, right? What are you guys struggling with, and what are you having some issues with or challenges that you might want to talk about amongst each other and with me as well. And then we're going to talk about learning about the adolescent brain. I feel as though it is really, really important for all of us adults to understand what is going on in the adolescent brain while it's being developed and what's happening, because that is really our key to understanding how to effectively communicate with a teen, okay? Their brain is not working in the same way that ours is, and so I think the more we understand what's happening there, we might be able to understand how better to communicate with them. Learn effective strategies, okay, so we're going to talk about how to communicate. What are the skills that you might need? What, again, is going to be difficult, and how we can overcome them. So this is early adolescence, 10 to 14. Developmental themes are just adjusting to physical changes of puberty, okay? We have to continually remember that puberty is going on as we're in adolescence, okay? And puberty makes for things just to be all over the place in plain English, okay? Things are just, happening, and there's a lot of emotion going on, and their mood changes quite frequently just based off of chemically what's happening in their bodies and what's happening in their brain. They are going to test you. That is what they want to do. It is not because they're like, I'm going to test my parents. It is because that's what they're doing. That's where they're at in this stage and where their brain is at. This is the part of being able to start to exert independence and figure out, well, who am I? Well, I don't know, because I've been with my mom and my dad or whomever I'm with for X amount of years, and now I'm trying to figure out who I am and who I should be, okay? And they can't do that necessarily underneath you, if that makes any sense, right? They can't do that always with you being there, and so that's why they're going to start to push and pull, okay? Increasing connection to peer groups. I say this almost every day when I talk to parents. It is just a piece of adolescence. You are always going to be super important, okay? And you are always going to be there for them. But in this stage of their life, they are starting to recognize peer groups and recognizing that their friends are now becoming people that they want to be around, they have to be around. The peer group is starting to become a little bit more important, okay? So I'm imagining most of you guys are in somewhere around here, like the later early adolescence to like the middle adolescence. And again, we kind of see similar things going on. Experimentation of the expert role in the identity. So someone was saying that I know how to do this, right? I can do this. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So this whole idea of, you're not connecting with me, and I know, how do you didn't do this so many years ago, right? Or you don't understand where I'm at because it's different world right now. They will say these kinds of things because they are basically saying to themselves that I need to exert my independence, I need to find out who I am, and I've got to do that. I have to make myself feel like I know what I'm doing, right? Okay? So again, the emphasis is on peer relationships, okay? That is what they're really looking for. They're looking to connect, to feel like they belong, and that doesn't happen in the household. That happens outside. That happens with their peer group, okay? And that is also what we see is when they get rejected from peer group, or when they struggle with their peer group, we see like, oh my God, it's the end of the world, right? It's like, that is it. It's the end of the world. I'm never going to have friends ever again. They overgeneralize everything, catastrophize everything, right? It's like the worst thing in the world. Again, emotions are heightened, okay? So they are firing on like gut responses. They are not thinking clearly. There is no rational brain going on. It is all emotion driven, okay? This increase of risky behaviors, that's a part of adolescence. Trying new things, pushing the envelope, okay? Figuring out how much I can get away with. Not, again, because they want to get in trouble or because they want to do things that put them at risk, but just because this is where they're at, okay? This is where their brain is, okay? And renegotiating relationships with parents. All right, so you guys now, where am I with my parents and what is my relationship like with them? You know, I'm not a little kid anymore, mom and dad. You know, I should be treated a little bit differently, right? And if you have siblings who are younger, they're going to kind of exert a little bit more of that power over that too, to kind of see the difference. Are you treating me a little bit differently because I'm 17 versus, you know, my 7-year-old? You know, am I looking at you that way, or are you looking at me that way? So these are hard, right? To say to yourself, okay, well, if they're doing these kinds of things, I'm supposed to just back off and not say anything, right? You know, that's where the tricky piece comes into play. So, and then we see emerging adulthood or late adolescence, okay? And so that's like 18 to 24 years old. And basically in that piece, they're transitioning into adulthood. You know, we're seeing them again be super independent at this point. The shift is really now career focus, you know, life focus, things like that, okay? And I know that's later on in life, but I think it's important to kind of touch upon those things. Okay, so my favorite part of the brain and knowing about the brain in adolescence is this. That the brain develops from the back to the front, okay? And why is that so important? It's because the back of the brain is what houses all of this emotion, okay? It's the aggression, it's this egocentrism, which I'm gonna talk about in a little bit. It's poor impulse control. So back here, it's like firing like this, right? And it's like gut responses, and it's just, I feel something, so I'm gonna just say it. I feel something, I'm just gonna do it. I just, you know, it's emotion driven, okay? There is no logic or reason. And that is the area of the brain that kind of is firing for them more than anything. So guys, think of like fight or flight, right? If you're in a situation and you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you get nervous and you start to kind of go into this place where what am I going to do, right? I'm kind of like fighting. Am I going to flight, or am I going to go numb, right? So you're kind of like everything's heightened, right? That is kind of where they're at all the time, almost, in a way, all right? And that's emotion driven, okay? Just think of it that way. The frontal lobe, or the prefrontal cortex, is what develops last. So think about that. That doesn't develop until you're about 24 years old. Where are you at 24 years old? You're probably graduating from college. You might be graduating from graduate school, right? You may be in your first job, right? You're not 15 years old, right? You're not 17. You're way into this piece of life, right? And that doesn't develop this piece where it's like impulse control and pumping the brakes on things. It doesn't develop until then. Oh my goodness. What does that mean?
That's the decision-making part. So why does society say, okay, 18, you're an adult?
Why did we say that, right? That's a great question. Yeah.
They couldn't even rent a car at 18.
It's a great question, right? I mean, think about it. And now they're even saying, I know I hate to do this gender stuff, but they are saying that males, we're going to push that 24 a little bit away, you know? And we're going to throw it a little bit like 26 or something, you know? So I don't know, but we'll see when the research comes out. You know, I don't know. Eventually, I think adolescence is just going to be forever. I don't know. I'm not sure. But yes, why do we ask them? We're asking kids at 17, right, 16, 17, 18 years old, hey, guess what? You pick a career, go to college, right, and pick one, and do it. Hurry up, let's get done. Like, let's fill out all these applications. And they're like, what? You know, like, are you kidding me? They have no idea, right? And then we tell them to go away to school, and then they're like, no skills and nothing, right? And then they're put in this environment, and they're like even more, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So absolutely, why we expect a lot from kids. We make them sit in classrooms and listen and have to really pay attention, and why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? And they're like, I don't know, I have no idea, because my brain isn't developed yet, you know? So I think it's important for us to realize that, because I think as adults we don't realize that. We can pump the brakes on a lot of situations, right? I mean, some of us, sometimes it takes a little longer, right? And there are times when we get angry and we say to ourselves, oh wow, I wish I didn't say that, right? Oh man, I should have said something a little bit different. But you know what? It wasn't so bad because I didn't punch someone out, or I didn't, fly off the handle so quickly, right? I'll be okay. A kid doesn't have the ability to do that. And I do this all the time with my clients and my kids. I always go like this. I go, what's happening right now? This is not working, right? And they laugh at me, but they get it now because I explain how this isn't even there. And it's like a visual that reminds us that when we don't have the ability to actually stop and think, we tell kids all the time, well, stop and think before you do something. Stop and think before you say something. And they're like, okay. And it's really like, I don't know what she's talking about. They don't have a clue, right? Because I can't do it if I don't have the skill, or I don't have the ability to do it. My brain does not function that way. Okay? So part of our job is to help them gain those skills, right? And be able to teach those skills as best we can while they're in that developmental stage and while their brain is still developing. Yes.
I think that's really important, not only for us to know as parents, but I'm struggling with this with my oldest, who's 16, and he struggles with severe anxiety to the point that I kind of pull him out of Hamilton. I have a daughter going here too, but he's now taking online school, and his sister just started school, and a week ago I'm sitting, next to him, he's crying. He's like, Mom, I'm never going to make it in life. 2 years I'm supposed to live on my own. Like, this is really great that I can go home and be like, hey, there's research, it's okay. Like, he's not going to take it from me where I'm like, seriously, you don't have to move out at 18. Like,
Sure.
You're still safe.
Yeah.
Getting it together.
Yeah.
But now I can go home and be like, hey, it's not really, like, this is okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes.
Not just because I say it's okay, but because it really is.
Because it is, yeah, absolutely. And I use this a lot with my students and with the people that I work with. I talk about the brain a lot to them, and kids even will say things like, wow, I never knew that. I think that makes sense to me because it feels, when you say that, it feels right, But they just don't know what it means. And so it's nice to be able to say, oh, okay, it's like I understand that, right? And it makes a little bit more sense, absolutely, yeah. So again, developmentally, they're in this place, and we have to be able to remember that, okay? And talk about it with them, right? And be able to have those discussions about what is going on in the brain. And the other piece of this, just a side note, because we're not talking about substance abuse or risky behavior, but it's a side note that is another area. If this isn't working properly, decision making, right? They're more likely to engage in risky behaviors and do certain things that maybe if they have all of this, they would not really kind of engage in, right? Because they would be able to weigh it out, right? The pros and the cons. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things too as we move forward. So they have poor decision making, and they're always emotional, okay? So egocentrism is this really fancy word for self-centered, basically, okay? It's not selfish, but it's a self-focused kind of thought process. So I almost say a little bit like lacking empathy in a way, right? Not understanding maybe what someone else might be feeling or thinking, right? But only really focusing on, they don't really understand me. Okay, why don't you understand me? So it's this idea of that they only can really relate to themselves and what's going on. And that's a huge piece of adolescence, okay? So if we also couple that with the brain development, when we start to hear these things and keep these things in our mind, we start to say, okay, I can approach someone a little bit differently now, knowing that that is where their thoughts are, right? That's where their brain is, that's where their thinking is. And so when I approach them, I'm gonna approach them in a way that I say, okay, they're coming from an emotional place. They're only really thinking about themselves. They don't have the ability to kind of, stop and think very clearly. Do you see how if you add those up, you're going to come from a different perspective maybe than a screaming why perspective, right? Okay. All right. So I just say, why is this important? It's important to remember that the teen brain is still in the developmental stage. It's still developing, okay? It is not fully developed yet. that the very things that we ask of them, staying focused, remember certain things, have empathy, understand why we can't do this today or why we can't do this weekend. They're not going to get it. They can't get it because their brain, the area of the brain in which you could get that if you had it, is not really developed, okay? It's small, it's not there, it's still in the developmental stage. So, let's talk a little bit about communication strategies, okay? So what is active listening? We're going to talk a little bit about active listening and what that means, okay, and how you can use it. So coming from a place of concern, right? Coming from a place of, as much as you possibly can, a place of understanding, okay? Sometimes we don't understand where they're coming from, right? Sometimes we don't understand it at all, and we expect them to understand where we're coming from, but we don't ever want to really give them the opportunity to say, we can understand where they're coming from, right? It can't always be one-sided. It has to kind of have this, he said it best when he said this dance, right? And you kind of have to see who's going to lead tonight and maybe who's going to kind of back away a little bit, right? Okay, not nagging, right? We have to make sure we're not nagging, because who really wants to ever be nagged, right? And they don't want to be nagged. And they kind of sort of always think we're nagging, no matter what. Being open to hearing things that might make you feel uncomfortable, okay? That is so important, all right? Because what they're experiencing right now in their life, look, it's their life. That is all their focus is, right? It's so important to remember that they are going to be experiencing things that maybe are very uncomfortable to us, okay? It might be really hard to hear that your daughter is gonna maybe talk to you a little bit about this boy she likes, but you gotta be a little bit open to hear about that, because if she's willing to come to you to say something, you gotta be able to sit with some of that discomfort, okay? And be able to be open to hear what they have to say. Remember, the more you push, the more they're going to push. And guess what? They are really good at it, right? Okay? So I always say, do not engage in power struggle. Do not do it, because you are going to lose every time, okay? So we want to be able to come from, again, this place of concern and support, rather than like, I gotcha, and nagging you to death and kind of making you feel like you're not, I don't know what you're talking about. And I use this word collaborating together, right? Instead of being demanding, all right? Coming from a place where let's problem solve this together. Let's figure out what might work. Hey, guess what? I don't have all the answers, right? But we're going to come up with it together. Including them, making them a part of things so that they feel like they have some of that power. That's the biggest thing. I hate to say this because this is bad, but it's almost like tricking them into like making them think that they have more of the power, and you're just like kind of, like guiding the ship, but you're getting them to where they need to go. And that's the dance that's going to be hard to do. Again, you have the ability to say to yourself, I am in an emotional state right now. I might be angry. I'm going to give myself a timeout because I need a minute to collect myself and not come from an emotional place. How many times do we say things like, you're grounded for the rest of your life, right? Like, are you kidding me? You're never going to be grounded for the rest of your life, right? A kid knows that, right? So it's like we're saying that because we're in an angry place, or they've done something that is really makes us really start to question, who we are or what we're doing, right? And so we kind of come from that place. If you can stay less emotional, and I always say, come up with like a phrase word or something, like wave the white flag kind of thing, like what's your like safety word or something, where you guys all know, like in the household, it's like, okay, when, I don't know, it's like too many peaches, I don't know, whatever. It's like, okay, that's like the word that you use, and like everybody goes to their neutral corners, and it's like timeout for everybody, because you cannot give a consequence, and you cannot kind of listen and talk to someone when you're in an emotional state, okay? So I think that's super important. Remember that you choose how to react to the situation. That's your choice. So yeah, they might have made you angry, or they may have done something to upset you, but your choice is the way that you react to that, okay? And our job is to guide them, right? To make better choices, to help them gain those skills. Remember that this is all about helping them gain skills. If you can think of it like that, okay, just like you taught them how to tie their shoe, this is the same kind of thing, but it's just a little bit less, like a little bit more hands-off, okay? But you're teaching them social skills, behavior skills, emotion skills, life skills, whatever you want to say. Those are the things that you are now trying to teach. And you're doing it more in a guidance kind of way, a little bit like, here you go kind of thing. And we are exhausted with our day, and now we have to go home and we have to, right, be active, right, okay? We can't just check out like Dad did in that video, right? Because what happens when Dad checked out and it went like, into DEFCON 3, like immediately, and maybe it didn't have to go that way, right? But you have to somehow get there, right? Somehow you have to get there and be open, okay? Big piece of this is that using their words is something that can help. So if they start to say something and you catch on to, this thing that they're saying and they're using that word often, I usually use that word and I will reflect back and say something with that word in it, okay? So it shows that you were really listening to them, and it also starts to create that relationship. Like, okay, maybe this person really does get me, okay? And if you don't know what that word is, ask them. Well, what is that? What does that mean or something? Or what is that about, And keep it open, okay, so that they can talk to you about it. We're not going to do that. Okay, so open-ended questions. These are your friends. Closed questions, not your friend, okay? Closed questions are when you say things where you can get a yes or a no response. Whereas an open-ended question is going to give you a little bit more information. Look, this is not perfect, right? So just because you ask an open-ended question doesn't mean immediately you're going to get something. But you have to be able to ask those open-ended questions so that you could potentially get some of that feedback, all right? Research also does show, even and with males too, it does take they process a little slower. And like females are like quick to kind of have that conversation and be a little bit more emotive in that way. So sometimes if you do have sons, be able to kind of give them a second. Just give them a second. We are ready to be like, you didn't answer. Why didn't you answer? Oh my gosh, like whatever. It's like, no, like throw it out there. It's like kind of like fishing. Like you just let it leave there, And I don't know, people fish here in Arizona, right? Yeah. So, you kind of just like leave it there, And then you kind of have to just wait a little bit. And you are like dying on the inside, You're kind of like, oh my God, and I'm so tired, and oh my goodness, right? But you have to just take a minute. And they will come up with something. They will start to talk to you. Once they know that they feel safe, right? They need to know that they feel safe enough to be able to say something, and you are not going to. Some of us were talking about how it might be difficult and how different types of kids it might be difficult if someone is a little bit more shyer, quieter, or more reserved. So can I share out a little bit what we talked about? So how do you get a child who's more quiet or reserved, or who doesn't really, not as verbal to talk? And so I was saying that some suggestions could be to getting them in their comfort zone, okay? So maybe talking to them in their room versus, sitting them down at the kitchen table, because that's like their turf, right, versus your turf. Another piece is getting them to do an activity, right? So if they like to play sports, or if they like to draw, or they like to journal, or play music, maybe that's when you guys can like have a little bit of a conversation, because they're a little distracted almost in a way, and it's a little bit more of a comfort level where they're going to be a little bit more open to talking to you. Another piece of it too is not sitting face to face, thank you, I couldn't think of that for a second, but rather next to each other, okay? That really does help, and also takes away from this feeling again of confrontation, right? I also have a tendency to walk with my students whenever I need to talk with them. I don't sit down with them particularly. I do that a lot with males, and I was just saying that a lot of times if you sit face to face with a male, odds are they are going to shut down more than if you sit kind of next to them, okay? So those are some strategies that you kind of can do. Also, if someone doesn't want to talk to you, you can have them write, you can have them draw. So there's all of those kinds of different techniques that you can use as well in order to get them maybe to open up and talk. And then it will get a little bit easier. Again, once they recognize that you are a safe place, that it's comfortable, like that you're not going to yell at them all the time, like that you're not going to say, why did you do that? Or that you're going to question maybe what they're doing, but you're going to be a little bit more open to it, they might start to actually open up to talk a little bit more. So, any questions or comments, concerns, thoughts? That's it? Okay. Thank you guys so much. It was nice to be here. Okay.